In a sunny day, officers of the North Central Police Department were having a quiet day until a phone call disturbed everyone's peace. Someone reported that all the residents of Lipankai village suddenly disappeared and there is no trace of them. Enver Kaden was one of the detectives in the police station who was assigned to go to the village and find out what was going on. Also, an agent familiar with the area from the local police center of Naifara City was scheduled to come and help Detective Enver. Although Detective Enver had already heard of Lipankai's small population, but it was still weird that all the people of Lipankai disappeared at the same time. Enver got into his car and drove to Lipankai. To reach the village, he had to drive for about 2 hours on forest roads. On his way, he passed by Half Moon Lake and Miss Stasher's roadside restaurant, and a bit later, he reached Lipankai village, which was in the heart of the forest. Enver had heard that for several years, once the children of Lipankai turn 18, they go to the city and never come back. And this was why Lipankai consisted of men and women over 40, with no more birth happening. So, most likely this village, which currently has only 4 houses left, will be forgotten forever in a few years. Enver got out of the car and took a look around. He was a bit terrified by the silence of the village. Suddenly, he saw a man hiding among the huts. Enver raised his hands to say hi, but the man ran away. "Hey, stop!" shouted Enver. But the man did not stop and disappeared into the woods. Enver looked around hopelessly and saw a police officer coming towards him holding the unknown man. "I'm Detective Enver Kaden from North Central Police Department, and you are..."
"Charles, my name is Charles. I was sent to help you," said the young police officer.
"Good to see you, Charles. And who are you? Why were you running away from me?"
I am from this village. I was the one who called the police and reported the disappearance of the people. I didn't know you were a policeman, otherwise I wouldn't have run. Oh, and my name is Howard. Howard Drowning, by the way," said the unknown man with a trembling voice. Any ID?" said Charles. No, but I can prove I live here," said Howard. As they were walking through the village, Howard pointed to a house and said, This is my house."
"Well, how do we know you're telling us the truth?"
Okay, if you go to the kitchen and open the middle drawer, you will see 3 green knives."
Enver checked the kitchen and saw the knives, so he believed Howard. He believed him despite it wasn't strong enough as a clue. Although Enver believed Howard, Charles was still suspicious. "Charles, take a look around. See what you can find. Let me know if you found anything," Enver said to Charles.
"Got it, sir."
"And you stay on my side and don't move a muscle until I check inside. You understand what I'm saying?"
Yes, sir. Yeah, I understand."
So Enver got into Howard's house. He decided to check the bedroom first. Once he entered, he ended up with a messy room. In a messy room, something got Enver's attention. A strange symbol made of animal bones hanging on the wall. Also, there were some drops of blood on the ground. Everything seemed weird to Enver. He sat down to have a closer look, but then he saw a wallet under the bed. He reached out and took the wallet. Once he opened it, he heard Charles calling him from a distance.
Mr. Caden! Mr. Caden! Mr. Caden! Mr. Caden!
Enver got out of the house and saw Howard, who was terrified. They followed Charles's voice, which could be heard from outside of the village. A few hundred meters away, they reached Charles. "What's going on, Charles? What did you find?" Enver asked.
Don't you smell it? It smells like a corpse. I thought it might have something to do with the lost people of the village, said Charles.
They went to find out where the smell comes from, and eventually they reached somewhere the smell seems to be coming out of. A water well.
This was once full of water, but unfortunately 5 years ago it dried up for no reason, Howard said.
Can you go down and check the inside, Charles?
Well,
Charles thought for a second.
I can go down and check it out,
Howard interrupted. Amber and Charles looked at each other and said nothing. It seemed they were fine with Howard going down. Howard went down the water well, and a few minutes later he shouted, "I found a corpse! Put it up!" They pulled the body of a young naked man out. What got Amber's attention was the body seemed to have been killed recently, so the bad smell couldn't be from it. Howard, who was still in the well, said loudly, "More bodies are here!" It took an hour to take 5 bodies from the water well, including men and women. Not only the time of the death, but what made those 5 corpses different than the first one was their chests were teared open and their hearts were stolen. All these happenings shocked Enver and Charles. Among the corpses, Howard found his wife. He sat next to her body and started crying. A bit later, Howard wiped his eyes and looked at the body of the young boy.
I've seen him before. I'm pretty sure I have, but I can't remember where exactly,
said Howard while he was staring at the body. Charles, who's been suspicious about Howard the whole time, whispered to Enver,
"You still think Howard is from the village? Anyone who was among the killers could have seen the green eyes."
"I'm sure that Howard is from this village. My sense is never wrong," Amber said.
"It doesn't make sense because even if Howard is one of the villagers, he still can be the one who committed all these murders," said Charles.
Amber thought a little but remained quiet. He took out his phone to call for an ambulance, but he found his phone with no signal. Then he turned to Howard and said, "There's no signal here. How did you call the police?"
I went to Mrs. Thatcher's restaurant. There's a phone there," Howard answered.
Amber turned to Charles and said, "Go to restaurant by my car and call for an ambulance and back up." After Charles left, Amber sat next to Howard and said, "All these murders happened a couple of days ago. How long have you been away from home?"
I went to Night Forest for a week. I usually go there once a month and work at Mr. Petro Lema's butchery," Howard replied.
Amber asked, "How many kids do you have?" I only had a son who abandoned us once he turned 18, Howard answered. Amber took a look at the young body again and said, I've got a lot of questions to ask, but it's enough for now. Then he got up and continued, Everything happened so fast that I didn't have a chance to check the village. Please wait here until the ambulance arrives. Then he left Howard to the village. As soon as Amber reached Howard's house, he remembered he has already found the wallets. Quickly he got inside and go to the bedroom and took the wallets. He opened it and looked inside. There was an ID card of a man named Joshua Lamb. Joshua's face seemed so familiar to Amber. He thought a little bit. Suddenly he recognized the face and got shocked. And at that very moment, something hit his head and he fainted. "5 days before the police arrived at Lipankai, before the sunrise, some masked men had ambushed near the village. They walked into everybody's houses in the village smoothly with a syringe in their hands. First, they anesthetized the sleeping villagers. Then they carried them out on their shoulders. One of those masked men, who was called the Wolf Eater, got into a hut, and a bit later, it could be heard that he's been fighting with someone. After a minute of silence, the Wolf Eater came out with the body of a woman on his shoulder. "What was going on there?" his boss asked. "Nothing. She resisted a little," said the Wolf Eater, who was slightly injured. The masked men carried the bodies into a van that was parked among the trees. In the van, they took the hearts out of the bodies and threw the heartless corpse in a water well. Once their job was done, they all got into the van and drove away. 5 days later, when the Wolf Eater was leaving his house, he realized he was missing something. His wallet. He remembered that he had forgotten to take out his wallets before they went to the village. He got so stressed out and talked to his boss about it. "Was your ID card in your wallet? Are you sure about that?" his boss asked. "Yes," the Wolf Eater said sadly. "I hope the police haven't found out what happened in the village. If they have, probably we're all in trouble. Go to the red farm and submit yourself if the police have found the wallet," said his boss. Lipankai was outlying, and that was what made the Wolf Eater hopes that the police might have not found anything yet. He returned to Lipankai, and when he arrived, someone called him from behind. Once he turned away, he saw a police officer is coming towards him. At the Nye Forest City police station, while Officer Benson was talking to a young man who was recently arrested, he was given a mission to go to Lipankai. He got delighted by the given mission because he had nothing to do the most of the time. It was about half an hour by car from Nye Forest City to Lipankai. But Officer Benson knew a shortcut that could get him there in the same time. On his way, Officer Benson saw a young man who seemed to be familiar. He approached and called him. The young man stopped and turned to Officer Benson. Officer Benson came closer and said, "Joshua? Joshua Lamb?" The young man remained silent because he was a little terrified. "Don't you remember me? I'm Benson. We were classmates in Halibert School." Joshua, who was a bit calm, said, Yeah, I remember. You've changed a lot." "But you haven't changed at all. You've just got taller," Benson said. Then they started walking. Benson asked, "Where were you going?" Joshua thought a little and said, I was going to Miss Thatcher's restaurant. I want to see someone there." "Where were you going?" Benson said, "Lipankai. I'm going to Lipankai." He continued, "What do you do to make living?" Joshua said, I work in a farm. How about you?" And then they both laughed at Joshua's question. "Why are you going to Lipankai?" Joshua asked. Benson replied, "Someone reported that all the people of Lipankai have disappeared. I am the assistant of a detective coming from Kleinort City." Joshua stopped and thought. Benson said, "What's wrong, Josh? Why did you stop?" Josh replied, Nothing, sorry, yeah, move on." They set off again, and shortly they arrived near Lipankai. While Joshua had a weird smile on his face, he asked, "Officer Benson, may I know the size of your shoe?" Surprised by his question, Benson looked at Joshua, and he found Joshua's face insane and weird. Joshua killed Officer Benson and wore his uniform and threw his body into the water well where 5 bodies had fallen into. He walked towards the village, and a bit later he heard someone's voice. "Stop! Stop!" Joshua hid behind a tree. He also saw a man running away from a detective. To have the detective's trust, he arrested the man and took him into the detective. "I'm Detective Amber Caden from Kleinor Central Police Department, and you are..."
"Charles, my name is Charles. I was sent to help you."
The Wolf Eater was waiting for an opportunity to find his wallet and escape after he met Detective Caden. Detective Caden said to the Wolf Eater, "Charles, take a look around. See what you can find. Let me know if you found anything." The Wolf Eater walked away angrily. He knew in which hut his wallet fell, and he was afraid that Detective Amber would find it. That's why he had to make up a plan to get the detective out of the hut. He thought for a while and came up with a good idea. Immediately, he called out Detective Amber. "Mr. Caden! Mr. Caden!" A few minutes later, Amber and Howard got there. They were terrified and voracious to know what happened. "What's going on, Charles? What did you find?" Amber asked. The Wolf Eater answered, "Don't you smell it? It smells like a corpse. I thought it might have something to do with the lost people of the village." After they took all the bodies out of the water well Amber turned to the wolf eater and said, "Go to the restaurant by my car and call for an ambulance and backup." The wolf eater knew that this is the only chance he's got to take the wallet and run away. So instead of going to the restaurant, he hid the detective's car among the trees. Then he went to Howard's hut to find his wallet. But all of a sudden, he saw Amber coming towards the hut. So he quickly hid and waited to see what'll happen. Detective Amber entered Howard's hut. He took the wallet and opened it. The wolf eater was scared. He looked around and found a big branch on the ground. He entered the hut and he hit the detective in his head, which made him pass out. Howard was sitting next to the corpse and still staring at the body of the young man. At this very moment, the young man opened his eyes and sat. He looked around dizzily and said with a trembling voice, Where am I?" After half an hour, Detective Anver Caton opened his eyes and realized that he has been tied to a tree. Anver saw Joshua Lamb, the wolf eater, before him. The wolf eater said, "Look, I didn't want anything to happen to anyone, but unfortunately it did. If you had only come back 5 minutes later, I would have found the wallet and gun." Anver said, "You didn't want anything happen to anyone? God damn it, you killed all the villagers and took out their hearts." The wolf eater replied, "I only anesthetized them. Someone else was supposed to kill them." Anver said angrily, "Who did this? Who do you sell the hearts to? Whom do you work for?" The wolf eater smiled and said, "Those hearts are not for sale." Anver got surprised and said, I don't understand. So, why do you take the hearts out?" The wolf eater answered, "Don't worry. Soon you'll understand everything. I'll take you where we took the hearts to. And after you, it's Howard's turn." The wolf eater took out a syringe and approached Anver. When the young man opened his eyes, Howard was still sitting next to the bodies. You okay? We thought you were dead," Howard said fiercely. The young man, who was confused, said, "Where am I?" Howard answered, "Near Lipankai village." "Who are you? Why were you in the water well?" The young man told him everything he remembered. Howard asked surprisingly, "What's your name?" The young man answered, "I'm Charles Benson." Howard knew what had happened when he heard the name. He got up quickly and said, Stay here. I go and call the detective." Howard ran to the village. Then he saw the wolf eater. Quickly, he hid behind a tree and saw that the wolf eater was going towards Amber with a syringe in his hand. Howard really didn't know what to do. A few minutes later, the wolf eater walked away from there and went to the water well. Officer Benson was looking at the bodies sadly. But once he saw Joshua Lamb coming to the water well, he remembered everything and said, "Why did you wear my uniform?" Joshua was surprised to see Benson alive. Then he smiled and said, "Hey, you still alive, classmate?" Suddenly, Joshua noticed that Howard is not around and he got scared. He asked Benson, "Where's Howard?" Benson didn't answer and looked at Joshua angrily. Joshua rushed towards Officer Benson. The wolf eater came towards the village carrying the body of Officer Benson. Then he heard the car sound and started running. From a distance, the wolf eater saw Howard getting into the car and taking the detective with him. He dropped Benson on the ground and ran to the car, but it was too late. The wolf eater knew that this was not good at all. Then he remembered what his boss told him to do if he didn't make it. Go to the red farm and submit yourself. He lifted Officer Benson off the ground and walked away disappointedly. Anwar was laid in the back seat, and Howard was going to Mrs. Thatcher's restaurant so that he could call the police and tell them about the terrible happenings in Lipankai village. The wolf eater was sitting in front of a man in shame. He raised his head and said to the man with a trembling voice, "I'm sorry." And at that very moment, 3 whistles were heard and the man ran out of the room in a hurry. Rita Kazinsky was a girl who worked in an insurance company in Kleinort City. Rita had a quiet and cautious personality. She has never struggled with anyone in her life. One night when Rita was going to bed, someone knocked on her door. When Rita opened the door, she faced a police officer. She got terrified a little bit. The police officer said, "Hello ma'am, sorry for coming this late, but there are a couple of questions that we need you to answer." That made Rita scared even more. She said, "You're making me nervous. Can you tell me what's wrong?" The officer said, "Well, today we arrested 4 people for kidnapping and murder. They used to take people and kill them in the countryside and steal their hearts." Rita was confused and asked, "Oh, that's so sad. But what is it supposed to mean? Why are you telling this to me?" The officer replied, "Those murders happened from a list. Look, I don't want to scare you, but your name was on the list. They killed all the names on the list except you. Your name was the last one, but don't worry, we got him." The officer handed Rita a piece of paper and said, "These are the names on the list. Do you know any of them?" Rita looked at the paper worriedly and said, "No, none of them." The officer said, "All right then, if you remember anything, be sure to let us know. Good night, Ms. Kazinsky." Rita was left alone with a strange fear. The poor girl didn't know what to do, so she called her brother Jonathan and told him everything. Jonathan said, "Don't worry, sis. I'm coming to you." Rita continued her life with this fear for a few days, and the situation was slowly becoming normal for her. One day, on her way back home, she had an unexpected phone call.
Hello, Miss Kazinsky. I'm Mortimer Plummer's mother.
Hello? Mortimer who? I think you got the wrong number.
If you take another look at the list, the list of victims, you'll see my son's name before your name.
Rita thought for a bit, and she remembered Mortimer's name. She said sadly, "Oh, yeah. I'm sorry for your loss. How can I help you?"
Thank you. To be honest, I still don't understand why my son was killed. Even the police don't give me clear answers. That's why I wanted to talk to you to see if you know anything.
Mrs. Plummer was silent and then said with a trembling voice,
Mortimer was the only son I had.
"I'm so sorry, but I don't know anything at all. I have nothing to say either." Suddenly Rita saw a suspicious stranger. She cut the call and made her steps faster. At that moment, her phone started ringing again.
Miss Kazinsky, I'm calling from the police station. Be very careful. We will soon send an officer to take care of you.
What? What are you talking about? What's wrong?
Well, it's about those 4 killers. They confess that there are actually 5 of them. And unfortunately, it means one of them is still out there. By the way, please go home and lock the doors until our officers arrives.
After the police asked Rita to get herself somewhere safe, she ran home without looking back. Once she arrived, she locked the doors and turned all the lights on. An hour later, the police called her and said,
Miss Kazinsky, everything around your house is under control. But please, if anybody wants to visit you, be sure to let us know in advance.
"Oh, thank you so much. Only my brother. Yeah, only my brother Jonathan is coming to my house." Rita was tired, so she decided to take a shower. Meanwhile, a stranger was standing at her door. The stranger was about to open the door with a key. But then someone shouted, "Stop! Stop! Don't move!" The stranger said, "Hey, relax, relax. I'm Jonathan Kazinsky. I'm Rita's brother." The police officer said, "Oh, please accept my apology, Mr. Kazinsky. I didn't recognize you." No, there's no need to apologize. Thank you for taking care of my sister." Jonathan got inside, and the police officer decided to look around Rita's house. A few minutes later, when the officer returned to the house, he saw someone trying to open Rita's house door. Quickly, he took out his gun and put it on the stranger's head. He said, "Don't do anything stupid. Just tell me who you are and why were you trying to get in the house." The stranger, who was scared, said, Okay, don't rush. My name is Jonathan Kazinsky. I'm Rita Kazinsky's brother." The officer was surprised and said, "Give me your ID card." The stranger gave him his ID card. The officer looked at it and he got shocked when he saw Jonathan's name. Holy mother of God, so who the hell was that guy? The officer broke into the house quickly. He saw the first guy standing in the living room. The officer pointed his gun at the man and said, "Hands up and don't move a muscle." The man was afraid and raised his hands. "Who are you? What did you do with Rita? Where is she now? The man, who was scared, remained silent. At that moment, Rita showed up and said, "What's going on here? What are you doing, officer?" The officer asked, "Miss Kazinsky, are you okay? Do you know this man?" Rita answered, "Of course I do. He's Jonathan, my brother." The officer got confused and said, So who's the guy out there claiming to be Jonathan Kazinsky?" They all got scared and went to see the guy. But when they got to the door, the man had gone. There was only a note on the ground. The officer took the note and read it. "My dear Rita, soon I'll bring you back to where you belong, and nothing can stop me. My dear, soon I'll bring you back to After what happened last night, Rita and Jonathan talked about the note for hours. Rita said, "First of all, we need to understand why they wanted to kill me. But I guess before that, we should find out the connection between you and the other victims," Jonathan said. Rita gave Jonathan the list of victims and said, "Look, Jonathan, I don't know any of them." Jonathan looked at the names. Suddenly he said surprisingly, "Hey, I guess I know one of them." Rita asked, "Which one?" Jonathan replied, Mortimer Plummer. He was a friend from childhood. Don't you remember?" Rita was surprised and said, No, I don't. But yesterday, Mortimer's mother called me and asked about her son's murder. She was very upset and sad. Jonathan said, "But how come you don't remember Mortimer? His father was one of our father's colleagues." Rita thought for a bit and said, "Oh, yes, now I do." Jonathan said, Yeah, we don't even know what our father's job was." Then he thought a little and continued, "But maybe Mom can help us." Rita called her mom and explained everything. Her mom said, "Oh, how horrible. To be honest, I've never realized what your father's job was. He used to claim he worked on a farm. And to be honest, I really didn't believe him. I was so suspicious to know what does he really do, so one day I followed him. But instead of a farm, I saw he went somewhere else and got into a van, a purple van." "Do you remember anything else? Anything special?" Rita asked curiously. Well, there were more people going into the van. I remember the face of one of them. That person had a bossy behavior with anyone else there. Seemed to be a boss to me. And if you want, I can draw the person's face." "Yeah, Mom, sure." Jonathan said, "Maybe Mortimer's mother can help us. Her husband was our father's colleague. He might know what our father's job was. I know also his address. We can go there." Rita called Mortimer's mother and said, "Mrs. Plummer, we're coming to you. We'll meet you soon." They arrived at Mortimer's mother's house with the police officer. Mortimer's mother was an old woman who lived alone. Rita said, "Sorry for your loss again." Mortimer's mother said, "Thank you. Still so many questions about my son's death, so I hired a private detective to find an answer."
Did you find out anything new? Rita said, No, actually we need your help. Jonathan said, Well, our father and your husband were colleagues. I know it sounds weird, but we have no idea what our father's job was. You know?
Sorry, but I have no idea what my husband used to do as a job.
Mortimer's mother said sadly, Well, he left home one day and never came back. Rita said in surprise, How strange! The same thing happened to us. Our father also left one day and never came back. At that moment, Mrs. Plummer's phone rang. Hello? You found anything? Mrs. Plummer raised her voice and said, Are you sure? What do we do now? Okay, see you. She was horrified and said, My private detective found out that those killers have someone in the police department. Probably the officer who's taking care of Rita is one of them, and he's waiting for an opportunity to steal her. Rita said, No, I can't believe it. It can't be. Rita and Jonathan went to the window and looked out. They saw the police officer talking to a man who was familiar to Rita. Rita remembered the man and shouted, Oh my gosh, I know that man! He's the same stranger who was following me yesterday. After Rita, Jonathan, and Mrs. Plummer realized that the police officer was one of those killers, they locked all the doors. We've got to call the police, Jonathan said fearfully. Mrs. Plummer said, No, they're no longer reliable. First, we need to get somewhere safe. Rita said with fear, But where should we go? Mrs. Plummer said, My private detective told me to come to Knife Forest. Do you have a car? Jonathan answered, Yes, but we're running out of gas. Mrs. Plummer replied, It's not that far, but for now, we should wait for an opportunity to escape. An hour later, when the police officer was a bit away, they quickly got into the car and drove towards Knife Forest. Rita, who was scared, asked, Mrs. Plummer, why are we going to your private detective? Mrs. Plummer answered angrily, I don't know, you silly girl. You've got a better idea? Rita remained silent. Suddenly, Jonathan screamed in panic, Look! He's following us! When Rita and Mrs. Plummer looked back, they saw the police officer chasing them. Go faster, please, said Mrs. Plummer, who was terrified. As Jonathan sped up, the police officer sped up as well. When they reached Half Moon Lake, Rita asked, How much gas is left? Jonathan said sadly, shit, we're almost out of it. Mrs. Plummer said, You don't have to be worried. In a few minutes, we will reach a restaurant on the way. We're safe there. And at that moment, Rita received a message. While looking at her phone, she said, Mom sent a message. I think she drew the face. Jonathan said, I bet that guy looks like this goddamn cop. Mrs. Plummer asked, What are you guys talking about? Jonathan answered, Our mother has seen the face of our father's boss. She was supposed to draw the face and send it to us. Rita said, God damn it, the signal is weak here.
They saw Mrs. Stasher's restaurant in the distance. Mrs. Plummer said, "Stop at the restaurant, lock the doors, and no one gets out." The police officer was hooking behind them, and that made them all stressed out. Finally, they reached the restaurant and parked behind a red car. The police officer also stopped a little away from them. Jonathan said, "What should we do now?" The police officer got out and pointed his gun at them. At that moment, Mrs. Plummer took out a whistle and blew it 3 times. Rita, who still had her cell phone in her hand, said, "Finally! I've got Mom's message!" The police officer came to their car and shouted, "Get out of the car and put your hands on it! Don't make me shoot you!" Rita said to Jonathan with a trembling voice while she was staring at the drawing that her mom sent. Jonathan, did Mom say anything about whether that person was a man or a woman?" Jonathan said, "No. Why? What's wrong?" Rita could no longer move. Jonathan grabbed the phone and looked at their mother's drawing. It was Mrs. Plummer's face. At that moment, someone hit the police officer from behind, and he fainted. Rita and Jonathan were shocked, and there was a deadly silence in the car. But then, Mrs. Plummer said, with a devil's smile on her face, "You're safe now, my darlings. No one can hurt you anymore." A few days before what happened to Rita and Jonathan, the fake Mrs. Plummer was sitting in a room. Then the stranger entered with a young boy. Fake Mrs. Plummer asked, "Did something bad happen?" The man answered sadly, "Unfortunately, the police arrested the boys. Only Paul could escape." Fake Mrs. Plummer asked, "How many people are left from the list?" The man paused a little and answered, "Only one. Yeah, only one of them remained." The old woman asked, "Rita?" The man answered, "Yeah, but don't worry, we will get her soon." The old woman said, "You know you'll ruin all our plans if you don't make it, don't you?" Then she continued, "Keep an eye on Rita and steal her at the right opportunity." A few days later, the fake Mrs. Plummer decided to impersonate one of the victim's mothers and call Rita. She knew that the Plummer family used to be neighbors of the Kazinsky family. So she called Rita and said, "Hello, Miss Kazinsky. I'm Mortimer Plummer's mother." Mortimer was the only son I had. "I'm so sorry, but I don't know anything at all. I have nothing to say either." Noticing the stranger, Rita hung up and ran home. That night, the old woman and the stranger gave Paul a mission to go to Rita's house and steal her. That's why the stranger and Paul went near Rita's house, and the stranger gave her a fake ID card. Paul looked at the ID card in surprise and said, "Wow, Jonathan Kazinsky? Wow, God, man, you took care of everything." The stranger gave Paul a piece of paper and said, "If you couldn't steal Rita, make sure she reads this." Paul was opening the door of Rita's house, and that was when police came to him. "Don't do anything stupid, just tell me who you are and why were you trying to get in the house?" Okay, don't rush. My name is Jonathan Kazinsky. I'm Rita Kazinsky's brother." After the police officer broke into Rita's house, Paul dropped the note on the floor and ran away. Paul came to the stranger and said, "Shit! Unfortunately, I couldn't get inside. There's a police officer, and Rita's house is under control." The stranger asked, "Did the police officer see your face?" Paul answered, "Yeah. So what? What's wrong?" The stranger said, "Nothing. Your mission is over here. Go to the red farm and submit yourself tonight." Paul, who was scared, said goodbye to him and walked towards the red farm. He knew that not good things are waiting for him in the red farm. On his way, he remembered the words of one of his friends. "If anyone goes to the red farm and submits himself, it means he has volunteered to have his heart ripped out." At that moment, he saw a police officer and went towards him. While smiling, Paul punched the police officer in the face. The angry police officer put Paul in his car and drove towards Forest City. The next day, the old woman and the stranger were talking about their plans. The old woman said, "I want to visit Rita and convince her to come with me to Forest City." At that moment, the man's cell phone rang. "Are you sure about that?" "I hope the police haven't found out what happened in the village." The old woman asked, "Who was it?" The stranger answered angrily, "Shit! He was the wolf eater. He said he left his wallet in Lipankai." After Paul punched the police officer in his face, he got arrested and taken to the Forest City police station. The next day, Officer Charles Benson came to Paul's cell and said, "Look, you were neither drunk or drugged, so what made you do such a thing to a police officer, and why?" Paul said nothing. At that moment, Officer Charles Benson received a piece of paper. While he was looking at it, he whispered, "Lipankai village." And then he turned to Paul and said, I gotta go now. We'll talk about it later. You'd better have a good reason for what you have done." While Officer Benson was leaving, Paul said, "You'll never know what happened in Lipankai village." In Kleinort City, the old woman and the stranger were talking about the wolf eater lost his wallets. The old woman said, "I hope the police haven't noticed what happened in Lipankai village." The stranger said, "What if the police have already found the wallet?" And at that moment, the old woman's phone rang.
"Mrs. Plummer, we're coming to you. We'll meet you soon."
The old woman told the stranger, "Rita Kazinsky wants to see Mortimer's mother. The replacement must be done soon." Quickly, they went to the real Mrs. Plummer's house. They knocked her down and put her body in the bathroom. The stranger said, "You have to get Rita out of the city somehow, so that the police officer doesn't notice." The old woman said, "I already have a plan. Look, give me a call half an hour after they got here. Then go to the police officer and talk to him for a few minutes." The stranger said with a smile on his face, "Oh, let me guess. And then I should go to the restaurant and wait for you to bring Rita and Jonathan. Am I right?" A few minutes after the stranger left the house, Rita, Jonathan, and the police officer arrived. The stranger, who was watching the police officer from a distance, made a fake phone call to the old woman.
Hello? You found anything? Are you sure? What do we do now? Okay, see you.
After the call ended, he went to the police officer and said,
Hello, officer. This is my first time visiting this city and I'm new here. May I ask you a few questions about Kleinort City?
The police officer kindly answered all his questions about Kleinort City. After he was done with the questions, he said goodbye to the police officer and went to the restaurant. Once he got there, he saw a red car parked next to the restaurant. He went to the red car and saw Detective Anwar Kaden laying in the back seat. At this moment, Howard came to him and said, "Sir, may I use your phone? I must call the police." The stranger asked, "Why? What happened?" Howard said,
Well, all the people of Lipankai village were killed and the killer is still out there in the village. Please, let me use your phone."
An hour later, the stranger was waiting at the restaurant to bring the old woman, Rita, and Jonathan with him. But suddenly, the wolf eater came in with the body of Officer Benson. Moments later, the wolf eater was sitting in front of the stranger, looking down at the body of Howard, Anwar, and Officer Benson laying on the floor. The stranger asked angrily, "Does Detective Anwar know who you really are?"
I'm sorry.
And at that very moment, 3 whistles were heard, and the man ran out of the room in a hurry. He saw the car that Rita, Jonathan, and the old woman were in. He also saw the police officer pointing his gun at them. He knocked the police officer down and went to the car with a smile on his face. An hour later, Detective Anwar Katen opened his eyes and found himself in a room laying down with 5 other people before him. After Anwar, the others opened their eyes slowly one by one in the red room. An hour later, they were all sitting together and reviewing the recent happenings. Detective Kaden said, "Well, now we know that they are the ones who kill people and rip out their hearts." Rita said, "And we know that they kill according to a list. So basically they choose the victims in advance." Then Jonathan said, "But we don't know the connection between the victims." Charles Benson said, That can't be true, 'cause the murders in Lipankai weren't done from a list. Those murderers killed them all. Detective Caden said, all except one person. Everyone looked at Howard. He said nothing because he was ashamed. Detective Caden asked Howard, "Do you know why Lipankai young people abandon the village after they turn 18? Honestly, I didn't tell you the truth. I mean, the whole truth," Howard replied with a shaky voice. Then he took a photo out of his pocket and showed it to Detective Caden. This is my son. He left us 2 years ago on the night of his 18th birthday and became a member of the Red Farm. But I was still in touch with him." The police officer asked, "Why do people become members of the Red Farm?" Charles Benson asked, "Where the hell's Red Farm? What do people do there?" Howard said, "I don't know exactly. I just know that they have strange beliefs and rules, like everyone in the Red Farm must kill at least one member of his or her family and donate the heart of the victim to the Red Farm." Anwar said, "That's why all members of Lipankai were killed. Because there was at least one member of the Red Farm in each family." Rita asked, "What about the names on the list of the victims?" Jonathan said, "I think whoever's name was on that list had a family member in the Red Farm." Rita replied suspiciously, "Our father?" At that moment, the police officer who was looking at the photo of Howard's son shouted, "My goodness! I know this boy! He's the one who claimed to be Jonathan Kazinsky!" Everyone was terrified. Charles Benson took the photo and suddenly shouted, What are you talking about? This boy was brought to the Night Forest police station last night for assaulting the police." At that moment, there was a green smoke spread in the room and everyone fainted. A few hours later, Rita opened her eyes and found herself alone in the Red Room. What happened to Detective Caden was the question of the Kleinort City Police. A few days ago, the people of Lipankai village suddenly disappeared, and Detective Caden went there to solve this mystery. But after that, nobody saw him. They discovered that Officer Charles Benson was also missing after going to the village. That's why when the police went to Lipankai village, they found no one. Also near the village, they saw some heartless corpse laying next to a water well. Detective Caden had been missing for about 6 days. That day, the people of Kleinort City were having a peaceful day. A short distance ahead, Officer Potter, who was driving, saw a car speed past him. Officer Potter chased the car, but the car did not stop. A little further, that car lost control and hit a tree. When Officer Potter arrived at the car, the driver had gone. The police officer looked inside the car, and he did not believe what he saw. He found Detective Caden fainted in the back seat. Officer Potter grabbed Detective Caton and found his body covered in blood. The officer immediately called an ambulance, and shortly after, he took Detective Caton, who was bleeding, to a hospital. The doctor who checked Detective Caton's condition told Officer Potter, "Well, officer, I should inform you that there are some stitches in this man's chest. I think he just had a surgery. Do you know what that is? We need to take pictures of his chest to find out what happened to him." A few hours later, the doctor came to the police officer in fear and said, Sir, I need to talk to you." The police officer asked, "What's wrong? What happened? You are scaring me. Is everything all right with my colleague?" Doctor said, "Well, we took a picture of Detective Caton's chest and noticed something weird that I have never seen before. Recently, his chest was opened and a heart was placed in his chest." The police officer was surprised and said, "What are you talking about? You mean he has changed his heart?" The doctor paused for a moment and said, "No, something weird. There are 2 hearts on this man's chest." Patrick Goldman was one of the citizens of Kleinort City who lived with his daughter. Patrick's daughter was sick and needed a new heart to survive. Patrick had tried hard, but he couldn't find a heart for his daughter. One day in a hospital, a woman came to Patrick and gave him a strange offer. The woman who knew Patrick's daughter needed a heart said, "Hello, sir. I know what your problem is. I want to help you if you don't mind." Hi, ma'am. Thanks, but how do you know what my problem is? Who are you?" The woman replied, "Well, we are a charity that helps those who need organ transplants for free." Patrick said with no trust, "Well, thanks, ma'am, but I think I can handle it by myself." The woman said, "Well, okay, whatever." Then she gave him a card and said, "Give me a call if you change your mind. Just remember, you'd better make up your mind before it's too late." You know what I'm talking about, don't you? After the woman left, Patrick thought he really wanted to help his daughter, but he couldn't trust that woman. A few days passed and Patrick was struggling so hard, but still seeing his daughter getting closer to death every day. He called everyone he knew and asked for help, but no one could help him. He was so disappointed and had no choice. So he decided to call that woman. The next day, some masked men came to his house in a purple van. They blindfolded Patrick and took him and his daughter away. When Patrick opened his eyes, he was in a room with red lights. The woman standing next to him said, "Your daughter's operation will last until tomorrow. Stay here. You can see your daughter tomorrow." After she left, frightened Patrick saw a man sitting on the chair next to him. He asked the man, "Who are you? Do you know where am I?" The man answered, "My name's Connor. I honestly Don't know where we are. My daughter is in the operation room. I think your daughter is also in the operation room. Confused, Patrick remained silent and did not speak to the man. The next day, Patrick woke up to the woman's voice. Congratulations, your daughter's operation was successful. Well, can I see her now? Patrick asked happily. The woman answered kindly, Of course you can. They went into another room and Patrick saw his daughter still laying down on the bed. He asked, When can I take her home with myself? The woman replied, 10 years later. Patrick was shocked and asked, You've got to be kidding me, right? I don't understand what you're saying. The woman evilly smiled. Suddenly, a masked man entered and injected something and made Patrick fainted. When Patrick opened his eyes, he found himself in his house. He was all alone. Patrick found a note on the floor. He took the note and read it. Don't worry about your daughter. You will see her soon. Just wait. If you tell anyone, you will never see your daughter again. A week passed and Patrick waited. Then the woman came to his house. What did you do to my daughter? Patrick asked angrily. The woman answered coldly. Don't worry, and don't get mad, Mr. Goldman. I have another suggestion for you. If you want to see your daughter again, you have to work for me. I won't let you out, you bastard! Patrick shouted. The woman said with a smile, If I don't come back in an hour, my friends will take out your daughter's new heart. Patrick said, If anything bad happened to my daughter, I will kill you all. The woman said, If you cooperate with us, you can get your daughter in 10 years and start a new life together. Patrick thought a little and said, What exactly do you do? What do you want me to do? The old woman said, Well, we take out the hearts of bad people and give them to the people who are in need. We also sell leftover hearts to the rich people who need hearts. Patrick agreed to cooperate with them because he loved his daughter more than anything else in the world. 9 years later, Patrick Goldman became an important member of Red Farm. Patrick Goldman was happy to take his daughter back home soon. Patrick Goldman had been doing bad things in Red Farm for about 10 years. But when he got home with his daughter, he decided to be a good man. One day, as Patrick was walking down the street, he felt someone following him. He surprised the person at the right time, but the man shouted, "Oh, wait! I'm Connor!" Patrick thought for a moment. Connor said, "Don't you remember me? About 10 years ago, we were waiting for our daughter's operation in that room with red lights." Patrick remembered him and said, Yeah, I do, but why were you following me?" I saw you by accident, but that's good because I need to talk to you," Connor said. Look, I had to work with them when they operated on my girl. But after a year, I took my daughter and ran away. Then, to avoid getting into trouble, I had to leave my family forever without telling them anything. Patrick asked, "Why did you steal your daughter?" Connor replied, "Well, in that 1 year I happened to notice some scary things. That's why I decided to run away with my daughter." "Scary things? What do you mean?" Connor said, "Look, there's a strange cult that wants to give birth to a new god. God's father must be a man with two hearts." Patrick, who was scared, asked with a trembling voice, And who is the mother of God then?" Connor answered, "Well, someone like my daughter and yours." Connor thought for a moment and asked, "Is your daughter still there?" Patrick replied, "No, my daughter and I have been living together for 10 years. Look, I have to go. It was nice to see you, by the way." Patrick was very scared. What if Connor's words are true? New God, Mother of God, Father of God with two hearts in his chest? Suddenly, Patrick remembered the man who had been operated in Red Farm for no reason. Detective Caden, Charles Benson, Howard Downing, Jonathan Kazinsky, police officer. No, he had to do something. Patrick had to save his daughter from danger. Patrick went to the Red Farm before sunrise to steal his daughter. Suddenly, he noticed a room where two-hearted men were present. Patrick, feeling guilty, decided to save them too. After his daughter, he also put Detective Caton in the car. But when he went to take the others, he saw the old woman standing in front of him. The old woman asked angrily, "What the hell are you doing, Patrick?" Patrick replied, "I know what you want to do with my daughter. Connor explains everything to me. The Red Farm is an evil cult." The old woman laughed and said, "No, you are wrong. I told this lie to my people to gain their faith. By the way, you know, faith is the strongest controller of a human being. Our real business is stealing hearts, Patrick." Patrick said, "I don't believe you anymore. I think it's time to kill you." The old woman said, "You can't kill me. If my heart fails, your daughter and everyone who has operated here will explode like a bomb." Then she laughed and continued, "Patrick, we put remote control bombs in all of them." Patrick said angrily, "It's a lie!" Then he took out his special knife. He wanted to attack the old woman, but suddenly a masked man entered and Patrick had to run away. When Patrick left, the man removed his mask. He was Connor. "Oh, Connor! It's been a long time, hasn't it?" said the old woman, surprised to see him. Connor said, "Look, I know I shouldn't have run away, but I was scared. Now that you have a member of my family, let my daughter go." The old woman asked, "Did you tell Patrick everything?" Connor replied, "I didn't know he was working at Red Farm, but now I saved your life, so please let my daughter go." Patrick, who had only saved his daughter and Detective Caton, was speeding away. Meanwhile, he saw the police car chasing him. He increased his speed, but he also lost the control of the car and crashed into a tree. Patrick, knowing that it would not be long before the police arrived, grabbed his daughter and ran away. Rita opened her eyes and saw that she was sleeping in her mother's house. She was very surprised and asked her mother, How did I come here? I don't remember anything." Rita's mother answered, "Well, darling, it's time for you to know some facts." Rita asked fearfully, Where's Jonathan?" Rita's mother said nothing and looked at her worriedly. Rita heard a voice that said, "I think you still need to rest." Rita turned to the voice and saw Connor smiling. Rita said, "Sir, I was with my brother. They took him. We have to call the police." Connor said, "I think we should call the doctor instead of the police." Rita's mother said, "Rita, darling, you've never had a brother. What are you talking about?" Rita was surprised and said, "Mom, what are you talking about?" Then she said to Connor, "Who are you?" Connor said, "What is this question? Rita, I'm your father. Don't you know me?" At the hospital, when Detective Cain woke up, he told the police everything. But when the police went to the roadside restaurant, they found nothing. Now the only person who could help them was Paul Downing, Howard's son. Officer Potter went over to Paul, who was still in the cell. He explained everything to Paul and asked him to help the police. Not wanting his father to become a victim, Paul told the police everything he knew. Apart from the restaurant, they have another hideout, a secret door next to Half Moon Lake, between two large rocks. Officer Potter hurried towards Half Moon Lake. The old woman was sitting in her hiding place. Suddenly the wolf eater entered and said, "I need to talk to you, Miss Stasher." The old woman smiled and said, "Well, it's been a long time that nobody has called me by this name." Then she asked, "Okay, by the way, what happened? Everything's fine?" The wolf eater said, I doubt. I want to know, what's the biggest thing which is about to happen?" The old woman said, "I have already explained to you 1,000 times. Look, when a new god is born, only those who have served him are forgiven." The wolf eater said slowly, "It's bullshit." The old woman thought for a while and said, Wait, have you talked to Patrick lately?" The wolf eater said, "You fooled us all, I know it. Patrick said you want to kill us all. Don't try to hide it." The old woman said angrily, "Patrick is a traitor. He lied to you." The wolf eater took out his knife and he was about to kill the old woman. The old woman said, "You want to kill me? Go for it. But if my heart stops beating, the satellite remote control will activate the bombs and many people will be killed." The wolf eater said with a smile, "Patrick said you were going to tell me this lie, so do not even think about it." At that moment, Officer Potter entered and said, "Don't move, you bastards!" The wolf eater said, "This bastard has taken advantage of all of us and must be killed." The old woman said with a smile, "Knife or bullet, it doesn't matter. I'll be dead, by the way." The police officer said, "The court will decide about the rest of your life." At that moment, the wolf eater stabbed the old woman with his knife, all the way into her. The old woman fell to the ground. Officer Potter shot and killed the wolf eater. The old woman was taking her last breath. Rita was still in shock. Her father had returned after so many years. His parents said that she had never had a brother, but she remembered Jonathan. Her mother said, "If you don't believe what we say, just look at your chest, darling. You can see a stitch. You were operated on as a child, Rita. Don't you know that?" Rita wanted to talk, but boom! After the old woman and the wolf eater were killed, Officer Potter entered a room to find 4 men with 2 hearts sleeping peacefully. He wanted to call an ambulance to save the lives of those 4 men. But then, boom, 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 boom. Detective Caden was still at the hospital. He promised himself that he would survive until he destroyed the red farm. But boom! Only Patrick and his daughter managed to escape from that terrible event. Now they were far away from there. Patrick hoped to make a good life for his daughter after 10 years. But that didn't happen.